Hi everyone, welcome to the state of Kubernetes in Africa. My name is Tunde Oladipupo. I'm a DevOps engineer. I have a background in infrastructure management, but I recently focused on cloud native deployment. And today I have with me my co-speaker.
Hi everyone, I'm Tunde Olu-isa. I'm a site reliability engineer and with prior experience working as a DevOps engineer. Most recently, I've been working on Kubernetes and a number of cloud native technologies. And I'm happy to be here today. And so let's get right into it. So today we're going to be going over how and why we actually submitted a talk for State of Kubernetes in Africa. And then we're going to talk about the adoption of Kubernetes in Africa. And then we look at some of the challenges that startups and enterprises are facing as they try to, they start with their journey into using Kubernetes. And then we're going to talk about the growth of the Kubernetes community also in Africa. And then we're going to talk about how CNCF can help with the adoption and also the community growth. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how we all can help, with the adoption and also the growth of the communities. So let's get right into it. How did we get into doing a talk on the state of Kubernetes in Africa? Well, here's how it all started. I think it was last year. I and Tunde were sitting right next to each other at a presentation going on at the KubeCon North America. And what we realized was that on the presentation slide we were looking at, there wasn't a lot of representation of the work that was being done in the Kubernetes space in Africa on the map that was being shown in the slide. And, we started exploring that and we said to ourselves, well, there should be more representation of Africa on the slide. And we took to our own responsibilities and said, we're going to go ahead and start exploring what's going on within the Kubernetes landscape in Africa, right? We started thinking about how enterprises and startups would be using a technology like Kubernetes. How are they adopting that? What challenges might they be facing? And so that's kind of how we got into, thinking about the state of Kubernetes in Africa first. And then I'm going to give it on to Tunde to talk about why. Why did we actually get into talking about the state of Kubernetes in Africa?
All right, so let's get right into it. Also, why did we start this talk? Why do we think the state of Kubernetes is something that everyone should hear about? It's very simple. Like the slide say, it says representation matters, right? One thing that we have to understand is that Africa is the second most populated country in the world, continent rather, in the world. Right now, we have to understand also that 60% of its population are under 25. And this 60% are young, vibrant people that are adopting technology. And because of this, companies are moving into Africa, right? And by moving into Africa, they are meeting a new set of challenges that is quite different from the North American counterpart. Now, how does representation come in? With representation, when every section of the community of the society is represented in a discussion of software development, it improves the quality of our production. Now, Kubernetes, as part of the open source, with the integration of representation of that large continent into the development life cycle, it's going to help improve the quality of our production. Is going to help improve, the kinds of issue that we resolve. And also, it's going to help promote the adoption or the upbringing of talents on the continent. So this is why we think representation matters, and why we think the state of Kubernetes in Africa is a talk that we think CNCF and the rest of community should hear about. All right. So now the next thing is let's talk about adoption. Now, adoption, it's a really big theme of our research, right? We talk to different companies, we talk to startup, we talk to enterprise. Now, one thing that we realize is that development teams are trying to build modern application, and also IT executives are trying to go through digital transformation, right? They are trying to move from legacy into a modern architecture. Now, and also with the explosion of agile methodology, they are looking for the tool, they are looking for that technology that perfectly encode the process, right? And Kubernetes has proven itself to be a leader in this arena, and therefore enterprises and startups are looking to actually adopt Kubernetes, right? Now, the question is that what are some of the benefits that, or some of the reason why they are looking into adopting Kubernetes? Of course, the flexible deployment, the quick deployment. We notice that a lot of startups kind of point at quick and flexible deployment because, as we understand, startup environment is a rapidly changing environment. Therefore, they need a process, a tool that can handle the quick and flexible deployment process, something totally different from the legacy infrastructure. Now, let's talk about enterprises, rapid prototyping. Now, enterprises, they are used to the process of having to go through this long process of, bringing out a new feature, developing uh, a feature. Now, they wanted something that can allow them to do rapid prototyping, right, and gives room for them to actually get fast, to get quickly to customers. And Kubernetes has proven itself to be able to aid in the process of rapid prototyping. Now, also enterprise. Enterprise also emphasize on the concept of cloud readiness. Now, for in North America, cloud may be a thing of the present, a thing that a phase that many companies have gone through. But we have to understand that on the continent, many of these companies are trying to understand cloud. They are trying to see how can they get ready for it. And Kubernetes, by migrating to Kubernetes, it takes them a step forward into that process. Now, let's take, for example, a financial institution. For a company of that size, for a company with a lot of responsibility of that scale, being cloud ready is one of their goals. But they do not just move into cloud readiness, right? They are thinking of something that can get them a step further into the arena, and Kubernetes provides that advantage. Now, optimization. Well, moving to cloud or moving into Kubernetes containerization, it forces enterprise to think about application optimization. How can we improve our application? How can we break down our application from the monolithic, architecture into something of service oriented? So those things are some of the advantages that enterprises really care about in the discussion of Kubernetes. Now, scalability. Now, scalability seems to be something very dear to the heart of startups. Startups are rapidly changing, just the way the demographics of their clients is also changing, right? They want something that can adapt, right? That can scale with their customer, they can easily, with a tweak, they can expand or they can grow, right, across cluster for their customer. So Kubernetes also offers that a lot to startups. Now, the last point, right, the MTTR, like in the meantime to resolution for security fixes. We live in a world whereby companies show up on the news quickly if with concerning things like data breaches. Now, for enterprises, right, for like I mentioned, right, we are talking about telecom companies, a finance company. Things like security is very dear to their heart because it's the core of their product. How quickly they can fix this, any tool that can aid in quick deployment of fixes is going to be a favorite for them. So Kubernetes kind of fits into the arena right? In a legacy architecture, right, if they are trying to send out a fix, they have to go through all this long process of sending out security patches. But with Kubernetes and re-architecture, they can actually take out the component that needs to be fixed, and they can send out, right, their fix. So that concludes, the adoption by the enterprise in some of the enterprise and startup, and some of the advantages that they see in Kubernetes.
So as we've seen the reasons why enterprises and startups are trying to adopt Kubernetes, let's look at some of the challenges these enterprises and startups are facing as they start to approach Kubernetes. The first one today is going to be where to start problem. And what do we mean by where to start problem? What we saw was that as enterprises and startups started approaching Kubernetes, they started asking the questions of where to deploy Kubernetes. That is, should Kubernetes be deployed in a cloud environment, or should this Kubernetes environment be deployed on premises? And so help was needed to determine how to navigate these factors. And then the next one was, what shape should the cluster take? And what do we mean by what shape should the cluster take here? And what that means simply is, what infrastructure environment should be deployed or configured for Kubernetes? What cloud services should be used? And at the same time, what software should be installed in the environment? Help was needed with navigating these challenges, and those help weren't necessarily available. And then the next issue we're also seeing, and it's kind of like related to the first two problems, is limited expertise. There were very, very limited people with knowledge of Kubernetes who are able to stand up Kubernetes in on-premises environment or even in a cloud environment, especially for production-ready environment. And then the next one was application maturity. A large number of workloads in the environments that we had interviewed folks weren't necessarily even container ready. And so this legacy applications still need to get to the point of maturity before they are able to run on a platform like Kubernetes. Another issue that we saw was that people complain about the overwhelming number of tools within the cloud native landscape board. Like if you looked at that board, you would see way too many tools in there, right? Several options for different categories inside of Kubernetes, for storage, for networking, and these things are some of the challenges that these enterprises and startups faced, because they needed someone who was able to help navigate these tools, being able to make the decision of cutting edge tool versus battle tested tool, and also being able to evaluate and do a technical assessment on these tools. And then the last one was maturity of managed Kubernetes service. Due to the limited expertise that is available within the landscape, most enterprises and startups seem to lean on or want managed services, because managed services provides support for this environment. And that way they feel like they can get enabled and they don't need to start from scratch. But the problem was that up until recently, managed services are now becoming more and more mature. And so now we're starting to see that, okay, this might not be much more of a challenge, but this was a previous challenge to most of the startups and enterprises that we had spoken to. And that concludes the challenges and that we saw with enterprises and startups that we interviewed. So the next thing is community growth. And this is how and what is actually influencing the growth of the K8 community in Africa. And then the first thing here is availability of learning resources. What we learned from folks that we had interviewed was that the Kubernetes.io documentation has really paved the way for folks who are trying to get started with Kubernetes. The amount of information in that documentation and the standards that have been set by the Kubernetes docs team has kind of like really significantly helped folks who are trying to get onboarded on the Kubernetes project. And then the next one is CNCF sponsorship and scholarship. The CNCF sponsorship of candidates in Africa to be able to go into OSS conferences and take the lessons learned from those presentations at those conferences to their back into their own environment or to their own respective startups and enterprises, and sharing these case studies with your fellow colleagues has significantly impacted community growth. And then also the CNCF diversity scholarships has also provided huge opportunities to folks in Africa. Along with some of the other CNCF scholarships, also scholarships to take certifications like the Certified Kubernetes Administrator, which also helps individuals who are trying to show their proficiency with Kubernetes, which currently is a huge deal because there are limited people who are able to show their expertise for Kubernetes in the African landscape. And now this poses a lot of opportunity for a lot of people because to take the certification for Kubernetes is quite expensive. At least from that is what we learned from the people we interviewed, that the certification is expensive and the CNCF scholarship really significantly helps. And then local meetups. What we're seeing is that now startups and other companies, DevOps folks, and even Go meetups are being spun up, right? Startups are coming out to local meetups to talk about their journey with Kubernetes, to talk about how they're driving things with Kubernetes, the impact Kubernetes is having within their environment. And then the next one is success stories. We're seeing that enterprises and startups are writing blogs. There was a specific example given about an e-commerce company who had written a blog about how they had migrated into using Kubernetes without downtime, and at the same time seeing significant improvement and experience from their customers. And then the last one is upstream Kubernetes contributions. We're starting to see much more folks from various parts of Africa coming in the Kubernetes upstream environment to make contributions. And these people are taking their learnings into their various Kubernetes communities and talking about what's going on in those upstream contributions. And so all these are kind of like, we're seeing the significantly signaling to the various folks inside of, like, the DevOps, SRE, Go, and even infra space in Africa. So that.
All right. So, my co-speaker talked about, things that has really boosted the community growth, and all these, many of these are in part by efforts from CNCF, right? The documentation and the Kubernetes community. This effort has led to some growth. But when after we spoke to a couple of people in the community, they had certain like challenges, right? Things, some limiting factors, about around the community. Number one is the limited expertise. Now, expertise goes beyond reading documentation. It requires like hands-on, operation, right? Many of us can agree that, we gain most of our experience from doing, right? Now, there's only a few of those people that have truly, it's been tested and, trusted in production, right? Because of the limited expertise, right? A lot of companies are having challenge, right? Getting the right people for the job, right? Now, because of that, those are some of the things that companies are factoring into their Kubernetes journey, right? And also, the second point that can be deduced from the expertise is that many of them brought up the question about mentorship, right? Mentorship is very critical from people that we've spoken to. They wanted someone that had done this in production, someone that they can talk to, someone outside, Google, Stack Overflow, GitHub issue that can address, talk about production challenges too. But because of the limited number of experts around, right, it has really constrained how well the knowledge of the community grows, right? Now, the last part. Now, we have people who are quite passionate about CNCF products, CNCF, tools, Kubernetes, cloud native landscape, right? Now, those they are willing to go beyond to actually tell people about the benefits of migrating into the cloud native architecture. But they are doing most of these advertisements, like most of these events have been organized from out of pocket. Because of that, it limits the amount of things that they can provide. It limits the amount of resource they can provide. It limits how far they can reach out, on those challenges. So those are three main things that we notice in the community: the limited expertise, the what lack of mentorship, and also the limited funding to host events that boost the community growth. Now, I guess the follow-up thing is, how can CNCF help? CNCF has been very instrumental in the growth of the community. We can all agree on that. They have provided results remarkably, right? CNCF Learning Foundation, they have provided remarkable resources. But we notice that a couple of areas are still lacking. For example, let's start with the ambassadors. Ambassadors are like, repositories of knowledge, right? Experience and also advocacy. Now, they bring the community together, they make awareness, they create awareness in the community. But we realize that the number of ambassadors around the African community is quite limited, right? So now CNCF can actually help with the growth of the community by bringing more ambassadors into the African cloud native landscape. It's going to help bring, experienced folks who are backed by good resource to talk about the benefits of Kubernetes to companies, and also not just the company, like my co-speaker mentioned. Engineers have a lot of battles to fight. They have to learn the technology, know the benefit, and also convince the executive on the importance of the tool, of the cloud native tool. But if CNCF ambassadors, right, also come on ground, also provide knowledge, outside guidance to this executive, it helps improves the rates of adoption in the community. Now, the next point, the sponsorship of local community. Like I mentioned before, many of those events that we see organized are usually organized out of pocket. Because of the constraints of resource, many of these organizers cannot do as much as they can, right? Right? As much as they should, or as much as the community needs. But with more sponsorship from CNCF, right, we are going to see a rapid growth of knowledge. Like there's going to be a more disperse of knowledge around the community. The roadmap inclusion. A lot of companies are moving into Africa, right? And one thing that we can all agree is that different environments sometimes pose different tech constraints or tech challenge. Because of this, sometimes companies in Africa have a unique set of challenge that might not be included in Kubernetes roadmap, or not just Kubernetes, some of this open source roadmap, right? Now, if we can think about this billion set of users, if we can think about them and their different category of need and include it in roadmap, it can actually help a lot of companies to actually adopt Kubernetes faster, right? So those roadmap inclusion, like we all know, like all inclusion, helps foster rapid adoption of that technology. Right. One other thing, scholarship. This is one area that Kubernetes CNCF has really shown good effort, because from attending KubeCon, previous KubeCon, we have met people who have been a major benefit from India, from Africa, right? But we believe with the availability of more scholarship, it's going to allow more people to pursue passion, or to learn more, or to meet other thought leaders, right, in the cloud native landscape, which is going to help them to forge better understanding, and also help them to navigate how they can impact this knowledge to others. Now, finally, one major thing, right, that we think can actually help foster expansion massively is a potential KubeCon in Africa. Now, one advantage of KubeCon is that it brings together the technical aspect, the non-technical aspect, and try to make them understand each other. Now, engineers, right, they can read the documentation and understand what is going on. But business executive, right, meeting other business executive, the thought leaders, meeting other thought leader, right, allows for communication, allow for discussion about the benefits of Kubernetes. When this executive, when these thought leaders, when these engineers meet other like minds, it allows for growth and expansion just beyond the technical community, even into different C-suites, right? So we believe these are some of the ways that CNCF can help. CNCF has been doing a very good job of expanding, promoting the community. But we think with this implementation of this extra resource, it's going to really further the expansion of cloud native landscape in Africa.
And one of the other things we wanted to cover was, how can you help? And one of the first ways is collaborating with folks in Africa, collaborating with folks in the landscape, reaching out to folks in meetups, setting up virtual meetups, helping out folks that are reaching out in the K8 community, with need for advocacy, right? Volunteering to speak at events in Africa. So one of the things that we saw was a huge need for thought advocacy, right? Someone who could help in, driving those thoughts into, at least into the leaders, into those who are employing these tools, those who are considering employing Kubernetes within their environment, and also the tools that are going to even run on top of Kubernetes. These were some of the other ways that we think that folks could help. If anything, like with everything that has happened in 2020, I think it's opened up more opportunities for virtual meetups. And so if folks can reach out, you can reach out to on, maybe just go on meetup.com and look up, meetups in Africa that are focused on, things like Kubernetes, cloud native meetups, and just reach out, or even visit. You could potentially also visit in Africa to do a presentation on site. So just being open to people, being available to provide mentorship to folks that are reaching out. And even though if you're not able to provide mentorship to them, you can also, you can refer them to someone where you think that might be able to help them with whatever they're trying to learn, or or whatever they need mentorship on. And that concludes our talk for the day. But before I let you go, I want to shout out a number of people who contributed to this talk. First one being Martin Umbura, Tinashe Mpomo, Ari Lee, and Femi. And then a number of enterprises and startups would also share their experiences as they approach their cloud native journey. And feel free, if you have any questions for us, feel free to find me at Get Tunde, and my co-speaker.
You can also find me at I am simply today on Twitter, right? And like my co-speakers mentioned, these people work a lot with us, the startup, the enterprise, and also individuals that give us their personal experience. So we really thank you for this work.
Thank you all once again.
All right.
Bye.